Well, hello, my name is Joel Adorman. I have the honor of being the lead pastor here at Summit Church. And if you're joining us online, I want to say a special welcome to you as well, whenever and wherever you happen to be catching us. We're so glad that you're there, and we think you will love it when you are here. So we can't wait to meet you face to face as well. You know, it's always shocking when one of these situations happens. The perfect marriage suddenly just publicly falls apart. The family that we thought had it all together suddenly just crumbles in front of everybody's eyes. That leader that we all had so much hope and aspiration with, and the one that we just thought hung the moon, maybe it was our favorite pastor or our favorite Bible teacher, or maybe it was just a parental figure in our lives, they have this very public collapse. And we're kind of left going, man, what happened? You know, one thing we always tend to say in those situations, like everybody tends to say about the same thing, we tend to say something to the effect of, gee, I didn't see that one coming. Because we never do. I mean, that's kind of the nature of it. The public meltdown is always public. Things shatter publicly, but of course the creaks and the crevices and the cracks started long, long ago, and those were always in private. We always fall in private before we fall publicly. And when we're on the receiving side of that, and now we're watching all this, we're left with kind of two decisions. We're either going to judge it or we're going to learn from it. And that always makes me ask this question: why do some people experience storms and they stand strong? Like when someone you look up to lets you down, that'll shake you a little bit. But why do some people deal with those storms and stand strong while others collapse under the weight of it, under the weight of the same storm? Like it's quick and easy for us just to go, well, just some people are stronger than others. That's too clean. That's not life. I mean, why do they? Why is it some people just seem to be able to bear so much and others just crumble under almost nothing? Because we're all going to deal with storms. We're all going to have bad things happen. It may not always be the collapse of someone in our lives, but the truth is, if you live long enough, someone that you admire will let you down. That's reality. What do we do with that? Because the storm isn't always just someone letting us down. Sometimes that storm is something that happens to us personally. It's a bad diagnosis. It's something that doesn't go our way. It's when we lose. And now we're having to battle this storm, and we feel like we're all alone, but everybody goes through these storms. So why do some people stand strong? And I would even add, they come out stronger on the other side of it, while other people just crumble. And Jesus had something to say about that. Of course he did. Because this is life, and this is the world we have to deal with, and he spoke into that life. And oftentimes he spoke into these situations in our lives using very, very, very tiny stories. He used these small stories that had very big truths, and that's the series that we're starting today. Which means if you've not been here in a while, and you just started coming today, you've not missed it. We're starting this one today. You've missed nothing. Because Jesus told the best stories. And he often told some of the most significant truths packed in these little bitty illustrations that you can just memorize in just a couple of verses. It's really simple stories. But then you're going to spend, the church has been spending about 2,000 years so far unpacking it because it's just that incredible. The truth that it contains is so massive that we still wrestle through it today. Today we're going to start with the very beginning of one of these called the wise builder. So what he's talking about, what do you do when storms come at you? And that's what he's talking about in this passage. Matthew chapter 7 is where that is, 24 through 27. It's just a few little verses. You're going to be shocked how fast the reading goes by. Matthew 7, 24 through 27. It's page 662 in the Pew Bible there in front of you. And if you scan that QR code, or you scan the QR code on the pew back right in that rack where that Bible is sitting, it'll take you to the digital message notes. Because I don't really care if you want print or electronic. I really don't have a preference for you. I have a preference for me, but I don't care what you do. I just want you to get into it. I want you to see this, because these little stories, these little small stories will absolutely change our lives. And we want you to see that in this message series, starting with this one today in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. And I want to set it up just a little bit. Jesus had just finished preaching probably the most significant sermon of his earthly ministry. If you're in the book of Matthew and you're going through a print Bible, you can really see it. If you have one of these Bibles that puts the words of Jesus in red, what you find is you have page after 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 page of red. It's this long sermon that he's preaching. the most significant he preached in his earthly ministry. And it's at the tail end of this. He gets at the very end of that, like he's done. He's done the so-called, final amen. He's finished with his sermon. And then he says this in Matthew 7, 24 through 27. He says, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. There's a few points I want to make on this little tiny parable, this little story. First, in Jesus' illustration here, they heard the same sermon. He's talking to the people that had just heard this sermon. They just heard all this information, and they've heard the same thing. So in the story Jesus tells, they heard the same sermon. They had the same opportunity. There was no secret message that you had to have a decoder pin to figure out. It was the same message. They heard the same content. It's like us. Every single Sunday, we hear the same sermon. Everyone is going to hear the same thing. Matter of fact, I remember my dad would often joke. My dad was a pastor for like 60-something years. And he would often joke that when you boil down every sermon we ever preach, we're always saying the same thing. Jesus is alive, so live right and stay right. He said, that's every sermon we're ever going to preach. And I'm like, yeah, that's about right. You pretty much have heard the same message. That's all we're going to say. That's all I can say. That's all Pastor Tony can say. Jesus is alive, so live right and stay right. That's the whole point. And so Jesus makes this illustration of saying, you've heard the same sermon. You've heard the same content. You've been given the same information. The issue is not information. The issue is what you're going to do with that information. Again, you don't need the secret decoder pin to shine on the letters to figure out what it's saying. We've heard it. What are we going to do with it? Because knowledge is not all it is. Both these men had some knowledge, but they did two very different things with that knowledge. They heard the same information. Information is never our problem. I'm one of these that contends that our issue in modern American church culture is not information. We are swimming in an ocean of information, but we are drowning for wisdom. We have no concept sometimes what to do with this stuff. I mean, you can Google information that I don't even know yet. You can look up the most obscure stuff from the Bible, and actually Google gets it right most of the time. Not always test the source, but most of the time it's pretty close. We can get all kinds of information. We can say, what does the Bible say about this? What does the Bible say about that? What does the Bible say about this? We can get all the information we want. We're hearing the same sermon. It's what we do with it that Jesus is starting to draw a distinction here. Because he points out that they dealt with the same storm. And this is probably the part of the parable that I find the most fascinating. And it's a little bitty part of it, but both of these men experienced the same thing. The rain came down, the waters rose, the wind beat against the house. Now, in the hearer's mind, when they would have heard this, they probably would have imagined like what you and I do. We hear the word house, and we get a mental picture. Maybe you're thinking a bungalow on a beachside property. Maybe you're thinking a big ranch-style house, whatever. You're thinking of some kind of house. They would have too. What's interesting about the illustration is both of these men went through the same storm. And they built presumably the same kind of house. I think the foolish man's problem was not that he didn't like construction technique. He knew how to build a house. Jesus didn't say the guy didn't know how to build a house. It was how he built it. It's where he built it. But we're not to that yet. The point that Jesus makes here is that they experience the exact same storm. They both go through these difficulties. I think sometimes we as disciples of Jesus, we really hope that maybe if we follow Jesus hard enough, we're going to get out of the storm. And that if we're just faithful enough, he's going to owe us one and we're going to get a pass on the next storm. A senior pastor I worked with for several years, actually it was the last time I was a worship pastor before I became a lead pastor, he would often say in his sermons, much to everyone's disappointment, he would say there's only two types of people in the world, those who are going through a storm and those who are just about to. Jesus never promised a storm-free life. Actually, he said at the Last Supper, in this world you will have trouble. He actually said you're going to have storms. So Jesus never promised a storm-free life. What he promised was a storm-proof foundation. Big difference between those two. See, you and I are going to face storms. We're going to get that diagnosis that we did not want to hear. We're going to deal with the fact that our bodies are aging. I have to deal with the fact that at 49, there are some things that my body doesn't want to do anymore that it could do at 29 or 19. Like, guys my age are not going to get drafted anytime soon. I had two bad knees and I have a bad ankle. They're not drafting me anytime soon. I am past that point. I couldn't even get in as a chaplain anymore. That's reality. I can't even do that anymore. They don't even want me anymore. Even aging is a storm we have to deal with. That we don't have the physical power we used to. We don't like it, but it's reality. We're all dealing with that. And then there are those unique storms that come along, those winds that batter us really hard. Those times that we go, God, what are you doing? I don't understand. And Jesus didn't promise we'd get out of those. Those storms are going to come at us, and they're going to come at us hard, and they're going to come at us fast. And what's interesting with storms is storms don't discriminate. If you remember several years ago when we had our 200-year flood around here, and all of a sudden things flooded that had never flooded before. Areas of our county and of our city flooded that had people in their lifetimes had never seen that kind of flooding. And what was fascinating with that moment is those who were faithfully following the Lord got flooded. And those who were unrighteous and wanted nothing to do with the Lord, they also got flooded. Storms don't discriminate. That's kind of Jesus' point right here. That storm's going to come at us, and it's not going to matter. This is life in a broken world. The storm is going to hit us. The water's going to rise. The rain's going to fall. The wind's going to beat on us. We're not getting out of this storm free. And I think sometimes that's what we hope someone like me is going to say is that, hey, if you just believe enough, God's going to get you, he's going to give you a pass on the storm. But he never promised that. Even the point of his story here is not that. The point of his story is that you're going to face the storm. What you do with that, that's the difference. Because again, he didn't promise a storm-free life. He promised a storm-proof foundation, which gets us into the point Jesus is making. Because I heard the same sermon, they had the same storm, but they had two very different outcomes. So you have this guy that built his house on the rock. Good foundation. If you know construction techniques, you know you want to build on solid ground. You want to build on something that's not going to shift as much as it's possible in our area to not have a shifting ground. That's where you want to build. I was watching this little YouTube video of the company that is renovating the movie theater here in town, the one by Target and the mall, Merced Marketplace now. And the developer was talking about how much soil they had to bring in. Because, in a movie theater, you come in at the top and then it slopes down to the screen. So they had to level all of that off in every single theater. And they talked about how many tons of dirt it took to level this place out. So that way when you walked into the front of what it's going to be, it's all on one level now. And then they had to pour concrete. Then they have to start building I don't think they're at the point of building walls yet. But then they have to start building this place up. And I thought, what a perfect illustration of this. If they had just gone in there and just put up a few little pillars in the ground and just kind of built some concrete on it, it would have collapsed fairly fast. And then we would have all been going, why didn't you do better? See, we know that you need a solid foundation. We know that. So we look at the story and we kind of go, no duh, because the power of these little stories that Jesus tells, it's not in these little details. It's in the big picture. Because Jesus is talking about wisdom versus foolishness. He's talking about two different applications to what he's saying. That this wise man comes up, he builds on a good solid foundation. But the foolish man, and here's a good pause right here. When the Bible uses the word fool, it doesn't use it the way we typically might use the word fool. If I hear someone racing down McKee in the middle of the night, I might be tempted to go, man, what a fool. I actually don't think that way. But if I were, that would be how we tend to use the word. What we mean is like dumb or silly. We mean that. That's not how the Bible tends to use the word foolish. That's our English word. The Bible word most of the time for foolish not simply, but usually refers to godlessness. It's someone who acts in a godless way. So it's not just stupidity, it is godlessness. So Jesus is saying the godless man built his house on shifting sand. And all of his hearers would have immediately picked up on that. They would have known exactly they would have caught the metaphor immediately for what he was talking about. He says, the righteous or the wise man built his house on a firm foundation, this rock. But the ungodly man, he built his house on sand. It would have stood for a while. The houses looked fine. The houses would have been great. But the storm revealed the foundation. The storm didn't affect the house. The house looked fine. It affected what was underneath it. See, that's what happens with our faith too. Faulty, false, fake, pseudo-religious practice looks identical to the real thing on the surface. You can fool a lot of people. You really can't. You can probably fool most people, frankly. I mean, it's going to look about the same. Faulty, fake religion and the real thing are both going to be involved on Sunday morning services. They're going to go, they're going to give, they're going to sing, they're going to raise their hands, they're going to pray. They're probably going to read their Bible a little bit. It's going to look the same, but the storm is going to reveal which one's real. Because the one built on sand, the one built on a faulty foundation is going to crumble the first time those winds start blowing because there's nothing there. The other one's going to get battered, and maybe some paint's going to get knocked off the house, and maybe a shutter or two is going to move. But when the storm recedes, that house is still going to be there because its foundation was strong. Because Jesus isn't talking about houses. He's talking about you and me. He's asking us, where are you going to build your life? It's easy for us to come along and to say, well, yeah, of course you got to build a house on solid ground. He's talking about you. Because we can go through all the Sunday services we want and all the Easter services we want and all the religious stuff we want, but when the storm hits, that's when you find out what your faith's really, really made out of. We're all going to hear the same sermons. We're all going to have the same storms, but the outcome is going to depend on what we do with it and what we do with what Jesus has told us to do. Because notice how he started all that. He said, the one who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, versus when he goes down and said, verse 26, but everyone who hears these words and does not put them into practice. And that's the difference between these two. The rock in the story is not try harder. The rock in the story is not give more money. The rock in the story is not sing louder. The rock in the story is not serve harder. The rock in the story is not look better. The rock in the story is not fake it till you make it. The rock in the story is not smile even though you're falling apart. The rock in the story is Jesus. But not just the man, all of it. God in flesh who died on the cross for us and rose again. That's the rock. That's the story. That's what we celebrate every single Sunday. And then we just have this annual celebration that just really brings us back to it all over again, where we're building our lives on what Jesus has done and what he continues to do. And the good news is the one who calls us to build our lives on him is the one who dealt with the reign of our sin on him. He dealt with the rising floodwaters of being the scorn of people and of even heaven. The one who bore in him the wind and the battering of the wrath of God the Father to pay the price for our sin. And then rose again 3 days later, securing our life forevermore. He's the one that says, you're wise if you build your life on me. Because what Jesus is giving us then is not sentimental news. He's not giving us something to inspire us. He's not giving us something to go, wow, that's really cool. That makes me feel good. No, he's giving us structural news. He's giving us something we can now build our lives on, something worth building our lives on. What I find fascinating is I love history. It's one of my hobby horses. I just love history, especially presidential history. But maybe if you remember in history, there was this Watergate scandal. And what I find fascinating about this is with Watergate, these 12 guys couldn't keep the lie going for a few weeks before they started cracking under the pressure of interrogation. And you have the apostles who saw Jesus alive, who were tortured and never changed their story. They died. You're not going to die for a lie. They said, I saw him alive, and they died for that truth. They're the ones also whose blood testifies even to us today that this is a structural foundation we can build on. You don't die for a lie. You live for the truth. And that's what Jesus is trying to tell us in this very short story in Matthew 7, 24 through 27. You're going to have the same sermon. You're going to have the same storm, but your outcome is going to be dependent upon this, that Jesus didn't rise so you could admire him. He rose so you could build on him. I mean, even the demons admire him. The book of James tells us the demons believe in Jesus and they shudder. They know who they're dealing with. They admire him just fine. But they don't change their lives because the outcome of their life doesn't change. Jesus is not there to be admired. He's there so we can build our lives on him. So there's a question you got to ask yourself first. What's your sand? In other words, what's that area in your life where you're not as obedient to Jesus as you should be? What's that area in your life where you are building on something very shaky? Maybe it's an area of your life where you're just looking at God and you're going, I'm not going to give you that part. That part's mine. See, that's sand. That's foolishness. That's godlessness. That's not what we need to be. And I don't want you walking out here just going, well, Joel, I'm going to try harder. No, you're not. Come on, let's be real. No, you're not. Well, Joel, I'm going to be more spiritual this year. No, you're not. That's not actionable. Something specific, like, okay, here's some. Maybe you might say, okay, here's what I'm going to do because here's where I've identified some sand in my life. You're going to say, I'm going to forgive that person that doesn't deserve forgiveness. That's getting rid of some sand. You're going to say, you know what? I'm going to trust the Lord even though he does not make sense. I'm going to choose to trust. That is getting rid of some sand and building on a foundation. You're going to say, you know what? I'm going to make that phone call and work that out with that person because I'm not going to let that awkwardness go on between a brother and a sister any longer. That's putting away the sand and building on rock. That's the first question you got to ask yourself. What's my sand? The second question you got to ask yourself is, have I ever come to a point that I have surrendered myself to the risen Lord? That I've committed my life to him? Because you can do all the religious stuff. Like I said, it's going to look the same. The fake thing and the real thing is going to look identical until the storm hits. And then you're going to find out real fast. And your crash will be very public. So that's why I'm asking you that. You got to ask yourself, have I surrendered to the risen Lord? And if you haven't, I got good news. You can do that right now. You can admit, you can confess your sin to the Lord. You can say, Lord, I admit I'm a sinner. I've tried everything else. I am the reason you had to die. My sin, my filth. I admit it. I confess that. But I believe you're the Son of God. I believe you died for me. I believe you rose from the dead to give me life. And then you conclude that prayer by maybe saying, I confess or I believe, however you want to get it out of your mouth and out of your heart, you're Lord, you're King. I'm committing myself to you. See, that's wisdom. That's building your house, your life on rock. And if you do that, and if you're on our digital message notes at the top, there's a response form. You can just complete a tiny bit of information. Just tell us you made that commitment. We will know about it. I'll walk you through that in just a couple of minutes more. Because that's really important. I mean, if you did that decision today, that is the most important thing. Nothing else I'm going to say matters at all. That is the most important thing. But for us as a congregation, we always have to ask ourselves this question too. Are we building on rock? It's possible for a congregation to build on sand. It's possible for a congregation to build programs but have no power. To build ministries but have no message. To go through good religious things but never know why you're even bothering to do them. We don't want to be a congregation like that. We want to build on the rock of Jesus. We want to build on a firm foundation that no matter what happens, we're solid on Jesus because the world is watching. Maybe you remember the events that happened starting in March 2020 and carried on after that. For congregations, that was a tough time. We were told that if we met and if we got together, we'd kill people. And every congregation had a choice to make. And I'm not judging what we did or what another congregation. I was here. I can justify what we did. And I'm not judging anybody. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying every congregation had that choice. But what we realized in that moment, going back in time 6 years, we decided that hospitals stay open in crisis. Hospitals have to be here when the bombs fall. Hospitals have to be here. And so we suddenly had to learn how to redo ministry. We had to mobilize. We had to start having food delivery. We had this incredible group of younger and middle-aged adults who would buy groceries or take stuff and make sure that some of our seniors had what they needed. And it was, in some ways, probably some of the most beautiful ministry I've ever seen. And whether we met or didn't meet isn't my point. My point was, when you're built on rock, you respond differently in crisis. You move differently. You think differently. Why? Because when the storm hits, you're not surprised by the storm. You just lean into it and say, okay, Lord, what are we going to do? What are you teaching us? How are we going to move forward in this? And we want to be that kind of congregation. We talk about our prayer time every Sunday. If you pay attention when we set that prayer time up, if you're really listening to the words, we generally will say how we do this every week. And if you're newer around here and if you weren't here back in 2020 and 2021, you need to know that was one of the first things we added back. I mean, we were always singing, we were always preaching, we did all that stuff. But we added that prayer time back almost at the beginning of coming back because we just said, you know what? It just didn't feel right without it. Not because of the tradition or anything like that. It wasn't a long tradition for us. But it was about us saying, we need to pray with people. And if they want to pray, we'll do whatever we have to. We'll put up plexiglass if we have to. We're going to pray with people. Because we want to be a congregation built on rock. Because at the end of this story, everything Jesus is saying about the house and all of this, he's not even talking about houses. He's talking about decisions. He's talking about choices. He's talking about what you're going to do with that information. He's talking about outcomes. Are we going to build our house, our lives, on foolishness, on godlessness, on the things the world tells us are important? Or are we going to build our lives on what Jesus says is important, which might look a little bit crazy to the world? That's what Jesus is talking about. Which decision are you going to do? Where are you going to build? Because it's easy to come on a day like this and look for inspiration, look for hope. And that's great, and that's good. I hope you get some. But ultimately, what Jesus is in is the business of transformation, changing us, moving us from where we are to where he needs us to be. Because Jesus didn't rise from the dead so we could admire him. He rose so that we could build on him. Stand strong. Stand on him. Stand sure-footed on that firm foundation. Because Jesus didn't rise for us to admire him. He rose so we could build on him.